Welcome to Direct Approach with Wayne Moorehead, an exclusive podcast brought to you by Direct Selling News. If you are a direct selling executive looking to help your marketing and branding teams motivate the field, engage customers, and further your brand's reach and impact, this is the podcast for you. In today's episode, host Wayne Moorehead is joined by Jacob McLain, Senior Vice President and Chief Strategy Officer of MONAT. Jacob has more than 16 years of experience as a consulting advisor, executive, and change agent strategist in the social commerce channel, where he has developed and implemented growth strategies and operational improvements for global direct sales companies like Arbonne, Amway, and Herbalife. Jacob joined MONAT as Chief Strategy Officer in early 2021, where he leads enterprise strategy, business planning, business intelligence, and key departments driving the company's growth. He's also a presenter at the upcoming Direct Selling University Fall event. We invite you to register for our virtual event October 18th through the 21st at dsu2021.com. There you can learn even more from Jacob about the strategic planning processes and key initiatives that are fueling MONAT's impressive growth on their march to become a billion-dollar company. On today's episode, Jacob and Wayne will share their experiences in and out of direct selling, breaking down the unique opportunities found in the channel and the powerful insights and innovations you can discover just by working with rather than for your distributors. Jacob will also cover how his role as Chief Strategy Officer supports not only branding and marketing initiatives, but product development and market expansion as well. Think of this as a masterclass in corporate strategy and business development presented by two of the top strategic minds in the channel. These are the kinds of insights and real talk about direct selling you won't find anywhere else. Now, a word from our sponsor.
You're always looking for a way to move the needle in your business. Give your distributors the power of productivity in the palm of their hands. Getting more sample products to customers and prospects is what makes a measurable difference in your growth. Now Technologies makes it simple for you and for your distributors, from concept to fulfillment. Your phone is truly your office. With the NowTech app, the key to growing a direct sales business is in the palm of your hand. To experience the power of the app, reach out to info@now-tech.com.
So let's get started. Here's your host, Wayne Moorehead, and today's guest, Jacob McLain, Senior Vice President and Chief Strategy Officer at MONAT.
Hey, everyone, and welcome to another episode of DSN's Direct Approach podcast. I'm your host, Wayne Moorehead, and we are very fortunate to be joined today with MONAT's Chief Strategy Officer, Jacob McLain. Jacob, welcome to Direct Approach.
My pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for being here and taking the time. We know you're super busy over there at MONAT. So this is something that I've been really looking forward to. You know, I had heard a lot about you and your background. And just before we started recording, we started to piece together that we had met. So while I was at a company, a natural health and wellness company and direct selling, you had been there as a consultant. And so it was interesting, you know, probably 10 years later, maybe eight, something in there.
Yeah, I believe it was 10 years.
Yeah. To make, I think it was probably 2011. So make that connection. So great to see you again. And again, super excited. As I kind of mentioned, you have such an incredible background. So that's very atypical. So. Yes. Yeah. No. Word on the street is you're brilliant. So you've had this really interesting kind of atypical background from direct selling. You came through the traditional management consulting route, and then that ultimately led in. Again, I'm not going to steal your thunder, but tell us a little bit about your career, the path that led you to, you know, first work with direct selling from a consulting perspective, and then to an in-house role at MONAT.
You know, it's an interesting journey in some ways. You know, I was always this really passionate auto enthusiast, like a car guy, and through happenstance, and you know, I don't want to chalk it up to strategy because it really wasn't. It was just a really lucky break. My first real work experience internship was at Toyota Motor Sales in Los Angeles, and it was incredibly exciting. It was like a dream come true for somebody who's always kind of loved cars and the auto business to then be working for what was kind of the world's leading automaker, fastest growing most revered in the kind of 2005 timeframe. In Southern California, just to be completely frank, a lot of the car companies have left the area because the cost of living is not necessarily compatible with every industry out there and every channel of distribution. So I found that I could work in that industry that I was really passionate about by consulting, and ended up joining Deloitte's Los Angeles office and their advisory practice in the consulting business, and worked on consumer goods and industrial products and automotive companies. Then kind of came to work with big CPG businesses based in Southern California, and direct sellers were kind of in that CPG vertical. And through lucky happenstance, I was connected with a Deloitte partner in West Michigan. We did the global strategy for, it's probably easy to deduce which company it was that I threw West Michigan out there, but the ultimate granddaddy of direct sales has paved the way for a lot of us that came in later decades. We traveled all over India, Germany, Latin America, developed the 5-year strategy. But Deloitte never necessarily did that pure strategy type of work. There was always that execution lens that followed it. So we also built out a BI capability and the management frameworks to see that to fruition. And it was really exciting to look back. I think 4 years later, they reached the revenue goal that they were planning to reach in 5. Like some people, I think if I look around colleagues in the industry or in the channel, as we say now, right? Some people kind of grew up in direct sales, or they had a personal connection to it, or a family member. And then there were a lot of people who happened to come across it and think like, wow, this is really special and really exciting. And for me, that inspiration moment really came working in Southern California and Orange County for a client with Deloitte, that you could see the way direct sales surrounded everybody with happiness and celebration and connectedness. And looking out long term, there were kind of those inklings developing that the way people shop was really rapidly changing. We were starting to see more advertising and less consumer intimacy pop up, and retail had already started to perceive some of its challenges. And my thought was, hey, this is a fascinating business that's structurally mostly variable cost, right? It cuts through a lot of the noise in people's lives around being bombarded with digital advertising, and uses personal recommendation to connect consumers with brand. And then it also does something really cool, which is rather than just giving Walmart more money or Amazon to send Jeff Bezos to space again, you can actually return some value to people, ordinary people, and you can make a little bit of a difference in their lives if they need to buy shoes or back to school clothes. Or you can do what's ultimately the most democratic, meritocracy-based approach, which is have somebody who maybe doesn't have the qualifications or the experience for a typical corporate career, but has the aptitude and the drive, and they can realize an income that is comparable to a traditional corporate career across a spectrum. Mm-hmm. So with that, I mean, it's a long answer, I suppose, but did about 10 years of consulting work, and Beauty Counter was one of our clients when I was doing consulting work. We helped Greg found that business back in 2013, joined as a vice president on her sales team in 2017, and have been kind of working in the strategy and sales space since then.
That sounds like such an incredible experience, not just from kind of the direct selling side, but from a career standpoint, starting out at Deloitte, one of the other management consulting firms. It's such a great proving ground and training ground for business strategy, the business fundamentals, to be able to kind of look broadly, across different businesses, be exposed to different channels, different categories. So, even just on that level, that sounds like an amazing experience. And then, so few people get to look at direct selling from that perspective as well, kind of that outside in. And then, be able to dig in so comprehensively, the global perspective that you were able to gain like almost immediately. A lot of execs and companies don't get that for, multiple years, into their tenure. So I think that's pretty incredible. So you talked a little bit about some of the perspectives were there ever moments, from the consulting side where you were kind of scratching your head, trying to figure out the channel? It definitely has different drivers, different levers than other sales channels. One kind of personal experience, I was at a company that, again, this is many years ago, but sold, a portion to private equity. So their analysts came in and were digging in and we're talking to each of the executives, and they were talking to me and a couple other people about the strategy around international expansion. And I remember this very specifically. I think they were a little bit dumbfounded. They were kind of scratching their head going, okay, if, market C is the third largest, direct selling market, why did you end up going into market G? And you talked about, well, yes, from a familiarity, from a market penetration standpoint, on paper, that market does look like the best. However, we had a couple of significant sales leaders that really pulled us into this market first. And I remember them kind of looking at each other, trying to make sense of some of these dynamics. What was your experience? Did it all seem fairly normal because it's early in your career, or was there a little bit of, this might be a little more complex in this channel than some of the others?
I think in my case, I was probably the one coming in not understanding things in many ways, right? To be completely frank, I mean, we all have to absorb and build off of experience. And if I look back at 2007, I think I was 24 years old, and basically flying to India to take notes. It was totally non-economical, right? Like $30,000 to send a 24-year-old to India. So I was really fortunate to be in a position where I could absorb. Deloitte has such a vast knowledge base. It's one of those organizations where all you need to do is kind of like send an email to your network if you have a question about anything, and somebody will have done it before, or have a perspective on it or a thoughtware piece. And I was so fortunate to be surrounded by people who had done work for large global direct sellers and was very much in absorption mode. And I think that's something that you keep in mind throughout your career, particularly transition to new roles in other companies or within the same company, is that coming in with assumptions is a really bad idea, because there are always going to be these things that absolutely shock you. And what I've learned is, in this channel, things that you would look at and think, oh, it's never going to work, preposterous. We have this beta testing at scale of thousands of ideas from our fields, and being open to that type of innovation. Sometimes you don't have to come up with the right answer. If you watch and observe what people are doing, kind of like that opportunity to move into a market where a leader had an established network. I think of Herbalife as one of the most interesting case studies of this, where in Mexico, people started to open nutrition clubs, because selling somebody a $75 can of shake mix wasn't going to work with purchase price parity. But for $1, the local currency equivalent, people in your town could come by and drink a breakfast shake. And in some ways, you're like, well, hold on, we can't do that, right? That's a restaurant. You need all the permits to do this. And it got so big and was such a successful, globally extensible method of operation that Herbalife then figured out, like, okay, how do we help people through the permit process to do this, because this works? So I say that in the sense that I definitely, in the back of my head, sat down and was like, wow, this is crazy. I was used to talking about trade spend and dealer networks, and you're like, okay, well, wait a minute. I did have the benefit of the partners, the senior managers, people at Deloitte, and those people are still there and run a fantastic direct sales practice with that deep knowledge of the channel. That Deloitte's culture is so impressive, of sharing, imparting knowledge, and moving people up through progressive responsibility and more added value. It was an incredibly fortunate opportunity to learn from those people with that perspective.
Absolutely. It does have to be, incredibly valuable to have that level of support, those resources, and that level of collaboration to pull on, especially jumping into something new. You talked about a couple things I'd love to dig in on a little bit. You talked about the case study with Herbalife, which I absolutely love. I do think too often, companies inside and outside of the channel try to change consumer behavior instead of, embrace it and leverage it, and develop programs to really support and drive what the field is doing. Another great example that I really like is Nu Skin. So, the AP24 toothpaste, I worked at Nu Skin. It was my first direct selling company. I started in 2001. And that product had been around forever, even at that point in 2001. And they noticed that, I believe it was a group in the UK, had really kind of embraced that product. It's at a great price point from kind of an entry point standpoint. I said point there a lot. I think there was like 3 points in there, but from kind of an entry, it is a valid point. I'm trying to make a valid point. And especially in kind of the burgeoning social media world and social selling world, the kind of before and afters, the demonstrable effects of this product, which was a whitening toothpaste, were perfect for social. And so they embraced it and really helped to take that and kind of extend it into other markets. And so it's this amazing case study that what was, a 20-year-old product for them, I still think it is right now, became one of their top selling SKUs, and certainly became an amazing entry point for the Nu Skin brand. So I do agree with you. It's kind of leveraging, observing, leveraging what the field is doing and trying to bring that back to corporate, and instead of the reverse, where you're developing a program that probably, won't resonate, and you're trying to kind of shove it down their throats. You also talked a little bit about the assumptions coming into direct selling. And I think that's for any channel, any company, that's something I've been very careful and mindful to try not to do. Again, I'm sure I've done it everywhere I've gone. But, as being on the other end, when you're at a company and someone new comes in, multiple times you feel like whatever they're saying, you're like, right, we tried that. We went down that road 100 times. We did this 4 years ago. I do think it's important to kind of go through this listening phase, which again, to me is a very active process. But how did you try to remove those assumptions and just come in with, fresh eyes into direct selling? Is that something you were kind of mindful of, or, through certain experiences, you realized, look, the team there probably knew more than I thought. And so I just need to observe and get my bearings and then kind of develop my plan?
I think it's just, number one, setting expectations. I think about, coming in as a consultant or into a new role within a company or at a new organization, is that you always ask first, right? In a non-accusatory way, to say, oh, have you ever tried a fast start bonus structured like this? Or what are your thoughts on this? Because, I think from a consulting vantage point, right, there was almost this assumption that somehow this channel is inferior to retail or e-commerce or other channels. Mm-hmm. And my reaction to having, sometimes there was this air of condescension sometimes when outside advisors would come in and assumed you worked for, one of these pyramid schemes that people hate on Reddit, and we all must be a bunch of fraudsters and bumpkins, when my experience is really being the opposite, right? That there's a unique talent profile in this channel of people that understand people and are truly much more passionate about what they do. People work much harder, they're much more invested in their businesses because of that human connection. And I think dispensing with preconceived notions, if you always challenge yourself to ask and come from a place of curiosity and learning, that is the best defense against imposing a preconceived notion in a place where it just doesn't belong.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I totally agree. It is such a different channel, and I say that in all the positive ways. The heart that is involved, the people that are involved, that aspect of it just makes it such a unique channel. And I've found, to your point where you were talking about some of the assumptions, maybe of the level of talent that people make outside the channel, looking into the channel. My experience is it's more complex and more challenging than a lot of the roles that I've had outside. You look at segmentation such a different way. You look at international markets such a different way. You look at product strategy such a different way, where you have to overlay that on top of a duplication model. And so, yeah, the people in direct selling are pretty amazing. I'm continually impressed, 20 years in, as I continue to meet more and more people, and as I've continued to do this podcast, everybody has been so incredible.
So yeah, I feel like people don't give themselves enough credit in this channel sometimes.
Yeah.
Right. I think that, and to some extent, there's the feelers, there's these different personality types and different thinking types. We're a lot of feeling people driven by consensus and happiness, but that's such an art form in and of itself and such a skill. And oftentimes I think we focus on places where we want to better ourselves or build skills out. And sometimes those are quantitative or in things like strategic planning, but people already know what they're doing. Right. It's just so instinctual. They think nothing of it, and maybe don't apply the right level of pride sometimes to that, because I think the more time I've spent here, the more people I've come across, and particularly with the team at MONAT, we have such truly impressive, talented people. And I think it's super important to take a step back and really celebrate that, get out of the keeping up with the field mode sometimes, and really take stock, because it's something that's very special.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that. So I want to transition a little bit into MONAT. So it's one of the companies that everybody in the channel has been keeping an eye on, incredible growth. It's truly, if not it's one of the largest hair care brands in the US. I was having a conversation with a few seasoned industry executives, and I'm just continually amazed. I'm kind of about this topic, but I'm just continually amazed, we all were, that within this channel, there are so many of the largest brands in their categories in the US, and people just don't know it. Again, I think back to your preconceived notions, whether it's weight loss, whether it's skincare, whether it's personal care, hair care, some of the largest brands are in this channel, which again, I think is incredible, and it just validates the power of this channel from a growth, from a scale standpoint. And again, kind of all of us, it's just a reminder to help, create that awareness, to help get the word out, to, combat some of those preconceived notions that we were just talking about. But talk a little bit about MONAT's journey from, growing kind of this, smaller startup, founder run, to where it is today. Again, incredible scale. I won't share numbers. I know about where it's at. I'm guessing you probably won't share numbers either, but it's really impressissive. Can you talk a little bit about the growth there?
Yeah, as a privately held company, it doesn't file 10Ks or those sorts of things, but we're pretty transparent about our numbers and our scale. We're in the neighborhood of 800 million plus, and
that's amazing,
going up to $1 billion. And we're kind of building our plan to $2 billion over the coming years. And we'll talk more about how that may go and what you need to do to bring that about. But I think we can substantiate a claim that we are likely the largest premium hair care brand by net retail revenue. There's one company that's kind of categorized in the premium area that's a little bit larger than MONAT, but it's also kind of available at CVS. So I don't really know why the competitive benchmarks that's considered premium. So I think that's an accomplishment that we're very proud of. I think if we narrow the playing field down to premium, we're arguably the largest there. And that's happened over the course of only 7 or 8 years. And my experience with MONAT's really special. Having been in the consulting role for a while, we had the chance to work with the team really early on. And I remember receiving a file of every order the company had ever received. And it was 20 or 30 kilobytes, not megabytes, kilobytes. Wow. The company was that small. And just so incredibly proud of what this team has achieved in the last very short period of time, to go from an Excel file with this many rows in it to this, what is really a powerhouse brand. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the fascinating things you mentioned is that these companies at scale in our channel may not have the kind of unaided awareness that you would see among their peer companies. And in some ways, I don't care. That's not to sound like cold, but I think it's, again, maybe one of those situations where we're applying a preconceived framework about what success looks like to a place where it may not belong. I mean, ultimately, if your ambition is to sell your business and you want that brand goodwill to drive a market premium, then yes, unaided awareness is really going to matter to you. But at the same time, like I remember reading your Rodan & Fields article a few years ago, largest skincare brand in North America that you've never heard of. And it threw out the stats about how few people in surveys could identify the name. And ultimately, like, does it really matter? You know, as long as the target market that you're playing in is aware of you and likes your product, then great.
I totally agree. It's not just awareness for the sake of awareness, but really making sure you're resonating with your target audience is really what matters at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think if we look at MONAT, you know, the aspiration isn't to be known as in a survey, right? I think that's almost seen as a result. You know, something that really stuck with me from my time at Toyota is they philosophically believed that your KPIs, especially your financial results, were exactly that, just results. You know, they were the downstream effect of doing the right thing. And you focus on what you do along the way to bring those things about, rather than just staying laser focused on those numbers and manipulating your business to fit them. If you manipulate your business to do the right thing, you're going to get the right numbers inevitably. And I think that's something that was really prevalent at MONAT, that the company is at its core driven by making a difference in people's lives, one person at a time at scale. You know, yes, it's a powerful consumer brand with, I think, something in the order of 3 million people have purchased from the company as customers globally. That's phenomenal.
Yeah.
But it's done that with a commitment to putting people at the center of the business, but also developing leadership at scale. And that was the thing that really inspired me and motivated me to make the move from one powerhouse brand across the country to another, is that commitment to developing leadership is really special. And it comes through in the enablement and the reward structure, that leadership can mean so many different things to different people. But it's not just about a paycheck. It's not about, hollow motivational aspirations or telling people they're going to live their dreams. It's about developing the skills and the influence that make a difference in people's lives, that help them in their career later on, that provide a career path within MONAT to them. That's really resonated, and it's just driven this company to such incredible scale, and will continue to do so.
Yeah, and it's not just business leadership or career leadership, but just in all aspects of their life. That's going to inform and impact just how they go about their day to day, the type of life that they live, how they end up taking charge of their life and really putting themselves in the driver's seat of their own life. I do love that's the kind of the general and broader impact that it can make around. Absolutely, the higher calling. So what do you see as been some of the big drivers? So again, putting people at the heart of the business, obviously being in the right product category, and really building that out. You've continued to extend into new categories. What do you feel are one or two other drivers? Again, not asking for the secret sauce, but just some of the drivers you've seen for growth within MONAT.
I think one that's incredibly important is our kind of underlying philosophy about compensation, right? It's a big cost driver in our business from the corporate vantage point, and it's a big reward for the people who engage with our companies. But I think that the lines are getting blurred between gig economy, influencer marketing, direct sales. And in many ways, the traditional influencer marketing or e-commerce approach to things is that you overinvest in acquisition and then can service customers as a brand. And MONAT has taken that concept into practice with a very, very generous fast start program called Smart Start. And I had the pleasure of working on this with them years ago in a consulting capacity. But I see that as one of the very critical drivers of the business, not just because I helped design it. right? That's egomaniacal nonsense. Like if you look objectively, you can say that a fast start program really focused on acquisition and something very tangible that, if you want to be successful representing this consumer brand as a market partner, what we call one of our sales representatives, you need the foundational blocks of that business, which are groupings of 4 customers and 1 sales rep that you can train and mentor, another market partner. And by doing that, that builds your team to scale, your earnings to scale. But we have put really generous outsized rewards on that behavior, and then have brought our customers into a very lucrative and generous VIP customer, preferred customer program, where they get these incredible discounts where, our philosophy is we're absolutely a premium brand, but we've made it accessible to a mass audience, right? That with VIP customer savings, with Spend More, Save More programs, with really frequent promotions, we can drive that excitement and keep those customers in the brand that our market partners primarily had a role in acquiring. Also, obviously, a clear role in maintaining their life cycle, customizing the shopping experience to their needs, being that personal face to the brand. But that focus on rewarding people for acquisition and growth in such an outsized way clearly has brought in so many sales representatives, so many faces of the brand, but also this massive customer audience through them.
Absolutely. That is, I think, one of the things that is so unique about the company. A lot of companies in the channel right now are wrestling with the question of, are we a product company? Are we, a business or opportunity company? And usually they'll land on one side and kind of underserve the other. And I think MONAT's done an amazing job of being both in a very natural and authentic way. You are very much product driven, you're brand driven. Your products are everywhere right now, but yet also on the business side, it is so vibrant, but in such a unique and natural way. I think that's part of the, that magic in the company, is being able to balance both, to serve both sides of the house without alienating one of the groups. It's been really commendable. I think it's been a big part of the success and the strategy.
Appreciate it. Yeah, it's been exciting to be a part of it. I think that we look at the evolution of the channel over time. It's one of those imperatives right now that the opportunity focus is becoming increasingly challenging, candidly, from a regulatory vantage point. That's a consideration, I think. But ultimately, I don't put as much emphasis on regulation or the guardrails, the FTC. Clearly, everybody wants to follow those. More fundamentally, it's if you let what is right for that stakeholder guide you, you're going to be fine within a regulatory vantage point. I think what's a more salient force in the channel right now, more than the risk of an FTC action in this admittedly very murky regulatory environment, it's kind of scary. But I think what is more tangible is the real-time feedback loop about your business. And I think every company in the channel has faced the detractors, the people who spend time on YouTube creating content that's solely devoted to how awful direct sales companies are. But that's almost forced some accountability in the channel, right? That we have to set accurate expectations for what people are going to get. We have to appeal to a full spectrum of people, from those who are just looking to hang out with some friends for a reason, up to somebody who really does, in these admittedly fairly unusual cases, make millions of dollars a year by developing a team. They also, I think, the other equation is that they spend a lot of money, right, to have their events and to appreciate people. And there's this perception that, somehow people are just getting fantastically wealthy for nothing. But ultimately, there's sometimes validity in those comments people are making, or things that people are pointing out. And I think it's really important to be open to those and really, again, stay to this true north of, if you're going to impact people's lives in a positive way, if that's your true calling, MONAT, we say we build beautiful lives. We want to develop leadership at scale. That you do that by genuinely setting expectations correctly, delivering on those commitments, and not just going out to the world and promising riches and fame, because that's simply it's possible, but it's not common, and it takes a
Sure.
really special person and a lot of hard work to do that.
Sure. And I think that approach and method just doesn't work anymore. The challenges, on the business side that you were talking about are still all there, and in some ways more heightened or acute than they've ever been. But I also feel on the business side, in some ways, you can do it more naturally than ever. I think back, 10, 20 years ago in direct selling, I would not have been a great person to build a business, fairly introverted, renting a space in a hotel and trying to fill it or doing it at my house. I wouldn't have been able to do it. It wouldn't have been authentic to who I am. But today with technology, with different tools, it's so much easier to naturally share a product that you already love and build a business that way. And I also think with, as affiliates and influencers and these other sales methods become more and more common, again, it just highlights and validates, I think, what the channel's been doing for so long. So I do think it's an incredibly beautiful time to be in the channel, especially for introverts like me. But I totally agree that that's a really interesting perspective. I want to shift into a discussion around strategy. As you know, we talked to Heather Chastain a few podcasts ago, she's brilliant, by the way. I'm so impressed. She's so impressive. And she did a great job of introducing, strategy and innovation and how to think about it and tackle it. I'd love today to dig in a little bit and get kind of a framework that people can take away. And I know that you've done this kind of both outside and inside. But before digging into the strategic planning process, I want to talk about the role of the Chief Strategy Officer. So that is your role, that is your title. I spent several years in the agency world. The strategist is a super common role. And on the management consulting side, it is as well. And kind of that dedicated strategy role hasn't been historically super common. The reins of strategy have been held by the CEO or the COO. But lately, I'd say in the last 2 or 3 years, there's been an enormous surge in populating C-suites, exec teams with this role. So can you talk a little bit about the role of the Chief Strategy Officer and why it's becoming more common today?
Yeah, absolutely. I think candidly, one force driving that is the management consulting business has been so successful. They've churned out people who can go corporate and
Sure.
do the work that a consultancy would do at a more cost-effective rate. I see fundamentally that there's still a role for outside advisory services. People like Brian Gilbert from Deloitte or Heather out there who have the broad perspective and can come into a company kind of unencumbered by reality, if that makes any sense, right?
Sure, absolutely.
Or the reality of being inside the company rather than just reality in general.
Or any political constraints.
Right. The transitional kind of items for me was that, if you can be a little bit more daring and throw out some crazy ideas, especially in the innovation world, in taking adaptations of things you've seen at other companies because you're out there all the time. I try to talk to people like you, colleagues in the channel, as much as I possibly can to keep that fresh perspective, even though I have been in-house with these organizations for 5 to 6 years. But ultimately, the Chief Strategy Officer is going to look really different from company to company. And it's going to really depend on that company's needs. And that's totally a non-answer. But from my perspective, I really see it, again, with that synergy of the outside services really matter. But the inside perspective, I almost see as the steward of the process and the governance of your strategy, right? Fundamentally, strategy is making decisions, a series of decisions. But I always extend that in the CSO role to it's making decisions about how to allocate scarce resources and seeing ideas through to reality. Because ultimately the strat planning process begins with a blank sheet of paper. And if it's successful, it ends with financial results. So as we've conceived of the role at MONAT, you always begin with what you want to accomplish in role design. Same thing in compensation design, right? Like if you want to put together a compensation plan, what do you want people to do, right? And pay them to do that. It's really not as complicated as I think as some people make it because the boxes and numbers are so overwhelming. So we've applied that same approach here, where if we're going to need to make decisions, and we're going to have to see them through reality. The role really encompasses, shepherding the beginning through the governance of the planning process, fundamentally.
Mm-hmm.
We also need to know what our business looks like and be able to measure our success. And so in that sense, the business intelligence, data and analytics function also is a fundamental part of strategy, totally connected there because it's an important input into an annual cycle, but it's also critical to keeping track and measuring and making course corrections to those plans.
And I think differentiate, sorry to interrupt, I think, and differentiating as well. So if from like a BI, from a research and discovery standpoint, if you don't really understand the world you're playing in, the space you're playing in, how you're positioned in the marketplace and in the mind of the consumer, as you make these decisions, you might end up landing right on top of someone else's position,
Exactly.
A very undifferentiated, indefensible place to land and compete from.
It's like that little shooting star, the more you know meme that's
yeah.
Weirdly enough, before I really got into the corporate world, I had planned to be an attorney and worked with a family friend who had a law office north of Dallas. And he always said, the people who win cases don't necessarily have to be the smartest. They're the ones that spend the most time, question the most, and learn the most, because that's where you come across the insights. So we do have a team that's dedicated, obviously, to kind of run the business things, but some folks who are kind of looking for new ways and insights to cut segments differently, to look at life cycles differently, to study cohorts in different ways. And we also have folks dedicated to monitoring what's going on out there in the marketplace, not just in the channel, but also in the areas where we play or have hypotheses that we may play in the future. Because you're exactly right. And I think this is such a critical role of a strategy function, is that in some ways, it's a little bit arm's length from the core of the business, right? That we recognize that it needs to be somebody's job to do this, to have an eye out there to actually do the measurements. Because if we're looking for line management to do it, especially in our channel, it's so dynamic. Those people are always going to have things to respond to with the field, more work than they can really handle in a week. It's always people that go above and beyond. And it's easy for, hey, let me read this article, to fall by the wayside. But having somebody dedicated to understanding that, just as you said, is super critical.
Absolutely. I loved your comment about, strategy being making choices. You're forced to make some choices, and the end result of those choices, what you do and don't do, is going to end up being your strategy. How do you combat or push back against that tendency where, we as humans, we in companies, we don't want to make choices? I think we look, we always, and maybe it's a wonderful attribute being optimistic, but we always see opportunities. There's this segment and that segment and this category, and let's go into there. And it's really hard to get people to say no to things, even if they're great ideas. How have you as a strategist found it successful to really help pare down those options to those most salient decision points?
It's so interesting that, you bring up some points about, strategy is such an intimidating word. I think Heather did such a nice job of kind of demystifying it and providing guiding principles about it. It's intimidating.
Yeah.
You look at this imperative to create a 5-year plan. Well, we don't know what's going to happen in 5 years.
Sure.
If we did, we wouldn't be I wouldn't be talking to you today. If I knew exactly what our sales number was going to be, I would be trading stocks and betting on sports games.
Sure.
And you have to develop that comfort that you're going to be wrong. You will be. It's like forecasting. Like we take care of forecasting process. They're always wrong. Like you can come up with multiple scenarios. It's going to fall somewhere within an expected range. But that's how probability and statistics works. As you mentioned, it's also limiting. You have to make a choice because at a certain point, you have to commit resources to something. You have to configure your organization a certain way. So you have to have a hypothesis. So I disarm those two things by being like, listen, guys, it's okay to be wrong. Where you're going to shine in business is when you're wrong. And what you do about it to stay as true to your plans and your hypotheses as you can, or to innovate against the reality that's developed and make sure your business is successful. How you manage those pivots and how you adapt in the wild is actually what's exciting and what really makes great contributors and great team members and great executives. But you also have to keep remembering, like, we've got to go with our best hypotheses. And at a certain point, you have to commit to something and you have to give it a chance to work. And what I have done time and time again, and it was fortunate that kind of my initial work in the channel was around measuring direct sales, right? Like, we did a strategy for this company, but we also put in place the framework to understand if it was effective and set out the expectations that would be achieved, right? Like, if we're going to recruit this many more people, we're going to have this number of retention, we're going to have this kind of productivity, the things that drive that add up to X billion dollars in 5 years. And we knew what the milestones were. What I have done typically when people are reluctant to commit to something, because there's a totally valid dynamic in this field that thrives off of momentum and feeling and instinct. That's absolutely critical. You can't toss it out. It's not either or. It's not numbers or feeling. It's putting numbers to the feeling and saying, if we do this, what's going to happen to these things along the way? What's our best hypothesis of how these things ladder up? And ultimately, that can help facilitate the decision-making process. When you look at a set of options and you understand the outcomes based on assumptions, pretty quickly, you can go from, hey, this is a great idea and it sounds really cool and it works for this other company, but say we want to open retail stores. Okay, great, cool. A lot of direct sales companies have done it globally for a long time with experience centers. Beauty Counter is a fantastic case study in really successful retail channel in major metros in the US. What's it going to do for our business? Helping connect the dots around which KPIs that's going to drive and what the downstream consequences of that may be are going to help you reveal whether it's a good idea or not. And it's taking something that's feeling based and making it quantitative and objective.
So philosophically, kind of taking it to its logical conclusion,
right,
so that even, anyone who even proposed the idea, around a different tactic or strategy is like, okay,
right,
yeah, maybe that isn't the best right now use of our limited resources. So yeah, so you actually, there's a lot of psychology in the role as well. I think helping to, guide people along the process, develop that consensus at the end. That's interesting. So do you see
the role is just bringing facts and data to the discussion?
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
Because I think in the right organization, particularly one like MONAT, people are always open, whether it's benchmarks of case studies before or the chance to simulate a scenario. It just helps drive the consensus. And I think as I use the phrase like the shepherd of the strategic planning process, the very beginning of that process is taking a bunch of ideas and evaluating them. And that's exactly what we just talked about. Like, I think it's really important for a chief strategy officer or somebody in a strategy role not to have an agenda. It's you feed your ideas into that same evaluation process with everybody else. You're responsible for the process of helping people pick the right one.
That's great. So do you see this role being necessary at every company? Does it belong, or is it more appropriate in a company of a certain scale or size? What are your thoughts around that?
I think that as soon as you can afford it, go that direction, right? Because it is such a benefit to an organization to have somebody make sure these things are being done. In the daily execution of business, it can be, and I think that so many companies in our channel have experienced this, that rapid growth is such a double-edged sword. Yes, it's financially amazing for the stakeholders in the business, for your field, for your customers, but it also means that you have a proliferation of programs, of types of consumers, of types of sales representatives, supply chain challenges, systems challenges, and those things must be done. You look in the moment, and having somebody who, it's their job to be looking out to next year in a very detailed way and 5 years ahead to make sure that we're staying true to our goal and not being distracted by opportunities at the moment is really critical. So it's going to look different from every company of like, as soon as you can afford it. It doesn't have to be a C-level job. It doesn't have to be a whole function. It can be part of somebody's daily routine. I like to think of more than strategy, it's planning. And having a dedicated planning function can begin with having somebody dedicated to sales planning or commercial planning. That's a director level person, a senior manager person who ultimately kind of looks after sales operations and what your commercial calendar is going to look like and doing your forecasting. That's kind of a stepping stone. Maybe you work with outside partners who help facilitate an annual planning cycle, but then hand it to that person to help put those into an operating plan, build the taxonomy of the things you want to do. They can carry that forward, and ultimately they're accountable for making sure they partner correctly to get them done.
So someone at least needs to own the process and the function, whether it's full-time or part of their job, but the second that a company can really afford to, whether it's outside, inside, get somebody that's dedicated and spends full-time kind of eating, drinking, and sleeping that plan, the process. Because again, it's not, I think a lot of times, and I've been guilty of this, developing, whether it's quarterly plan, annual plan, it's kind of the set it and forget it, but it is an ongoing process. Somebody needs to own, every aspect, the management, the accountability of that process.
Even just having somebody schedule the quarterly reviews or pull the numbers, there's a ton of value in that. And that can be 25% of somebody's job. But I have seen it so many times because we're in such a dynamic business, you can be in catch up and keep up mode. And those things are very easy to fall by the wayside. And they're absolutely critical.
So there's so many strategies within a company that are kind of nested under the corporate strategy. On the marketing side, the corporate strategy is going to inform the brand strategy, which is going to inform your product strategy, which is going to inform your sales and marketing strategy. From kind of a guardrail standpoint, as it relates to the responsibilities of the CSO, where does the baton get passed? How involved should the CSO be in things like digital strategy and product strategy? Is that day-to-day? Is that more setting the strategic foundation and making sure those sub-strategies ladder up and support the overall? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Again, from personal perspective, what I've seen be most effective is stewardship of the process, where you're going to partner really closely with those folks to help them form and crystallize their plans. But fundamentally, at least at MONAT, we talk a lot about accountability and role clarity. And ultimately, the digital strategy should be the responsibility of your digital team. They are accountable for delivering it. I think where the CSO steps in is helping, again, partner with those peer executives to work through what the right strategy is to embark on, help them understand how well it's working, create that accountability framework around it, and then get involved if we have to make fundamental changes or adjustments, and that can be as simple as helping guide the governance process, creating the forum and the routines to say, hey, we were going to go after this demographic with performance marketing to acquire new sales representatives on Facebook. And this is what we've learned. If somebody says, hey, I need some help interpreting this, absolutely, let's step in. Let's have the strategic execution folks who can bring their skill sets, help draw some conclusions, almost act like an internal consulting team. But then if those insights reveal, hey, okay, we should be going after a different demographic, then there's ramifications like you mentioned, right? And this is potentially another reason why strategy feels kind of gross. That's a strong word.
I love that you use that term.
We're so patterned to respect collaboration and have flat organizations. Like at Deloitte, nobody had their title in their business card, right? It just didn't matter. But ultimately, strategy does have to have a hierarchy to it. And you have to have, big ideas that flow down into the building blocks of that, and then the actual tactics that come out of that to bring them to life. And they have to be configured in such a way that it's clear like who decides what at what level and who's accountable for delivering them. And that starts to feel very military and command and control. But as those things change, right, they have ramifications up and down that structure of work. And the strategy team's role is really to make sure that if one thing changes over here, where we're doing the right thing over here to accommodate that change.
That's great. Thank you for the clarity. It's such an interesting role. It's so cross-functional. It's so collaborative. And ultimately what it does is it impacts literally every role, everything that everybody does, every action, every touch point of the company is going to be impacted by the strategic planning process. And again, I know from personal experience how challenging it is to not just create it, but have the ongoing plan and making sure that all the activities are in support of that strategic end. So you mentioned strategy being gross. It is something at times, like I love it, but at the same time, when you walk into your strategic planning meeting, you're like, oh my gosh, I do not want to do this for the next 2 days. Right. Why do so many companies struggle in every channel? Why do so many companies struggle with strategic development, or have that same feeling of it's gross? to put it simply, why is that?
I think sometimes it's too unstructured, candidly, right? Like a lot of companies have this tendency to, find a nice expensive hotel with a golf course and a spa, and have their executives drive an hour and a half outside of town and check in, and then just herd everybody into a room and talk. And that certainly has its role. I think that, when I've seen the most successful top end of the strategy, right? The development of the true north, it's been very, very structured. And often, again, going back to this, inside role versus what value do those outside partners or advisory services have to play? Having somebody from the outside facilitate your kind of top level initial executive offsite meeting is super important, because they're, again, unencumbered by the politics. They have a fresh perspective. We had an executive offsite a couple months ago here in Miami, also at a really nice hotel, candidly. But
you described every planning session I've ever been.
Right, it's exactly that. There was no golf course, but it was on the beach because we are in Florida. But we had people come in from the outside and really take the lead. And of course, it's my responsibility to, again, shepherd this process. I did a lot of the planning, the selection of those people, coaching them, making sure we got to the right output. But we didn't get in the room and try to solve it in 2 days. And it kind of leads me into the structure that we picked. Fundamentally, strategy is going to just go all wonky if it's not structured. And you can go about it. There's books, and every consulting firm is going to have a different philosophy, and they're going to have their own little thing on it. But I had an incredible mentor at Beauty Counter, somebody who I professionally respect so much. And she introduced me to a really interesting framework that I found to be incredibly versatile, whether you're setting a strategy for the company or what you want to do in your department. And it's in a book called Playing to Win by A.G. Lafley.
Former CEO of P&G.
Yeah.
And I love the framework. Yeah, sorry, keep going.
Incredibly versatile. And the book takes you through the application of it at P&G with the Olay brand in particular. But it begins with that winning proposition.
Yep.
And my humble advice is that is the subject matter for your executive offsite kind of brainstorming session, where this is all going to break down if you don't start with it, right? You have to know, in their terms, what it means to win, and set a goal that is measurable. And it's a little tricky, right? This is why it takes a couple days. It has to be measurable, but at the same time, kind of ephemeral and motivating. It's something you'd want to share with consumers. Like, I think it's Nike that says, we power every athlete. And if you have a body, you're an athlete. Like, that's kind of inspirational in a really deep and fundamental way. But, beyond that winning proposition, you have to come up with the numbers that are going to guide success at the top level. How many customers, what kind of revenue you're looking for. From there, you move into where to play. Again, it's all kind of a metaphor for a game. Winning proposition, what does it mean to win? Okay, where are we going to play? What products, what consumer targets, what channels, what types of channel partners for our channel? What is the profile of the sales representative that's going to be sharing your brand? Which countries? And that's a process of evaluating what the option set is and looking at the fit of the immovables in your business. I mean, ultimately, everything can kind of move, but there are some things that are tied to that winning proposition that are non-negotiable now. And it takes some things out of motion so that you aren't just in this kind of with circular reference, right? I use Excel a lot over my career and love it, but a lot of times there's this constant questioning and retreading old ground. And if you can start to bake some of these things in sequential order, it makes strategy way less gross and way less frustrating. So winning proposition, where to play. Then you move into how to win, which is really just the programs that you want to execute. And this is really tricky because they have to be kind of arranged into a taxonomy so that you have a hierarchy of work to be done and results to be achieved, that you can group them together. You can make sure that you have the management structure around them with clear accountability. And then that helps you understand the interrelationships of them. And then lastly, which is super important, I think people always think of strategies like the first couple steps, but I think as many folks have mentioned, it's ongoing. It's a full-time job. The type of work that you're doing is going to look a little different depending on the time of year and what stage of the strategy setting or refresh program you are. But how to configure is super important. The last step, beyond how to win, you have to understand the people, process, and technology that you need to actually bring those programs about. Mm-hmm. And they have to be budgeted, and then you have to make sure you're measuring as you go. But I found that approach to be incredibly versatile. You can have the workshops or facilitation virtually. I think beyond the first one, we've been incredibly successful in doing that out of need here in the last couple of years, that you can assemble a group of people, and as long as you have very structured agenda with clear outputs, you don't try to eat the elephant in one meeting.
Right.
You break it up into dozens of meetings over the course of a period of time. You really understand what's been baked, what the inputs are, what's still up for decision, and how you come to consensus to move on to the next stage.
Absolutely. Yeah, I do love that framework, that structure. To your point earlier, I think part of why people do hate the strategy process so much is they've never really had a structure that works or been shown a correct structure, or maybe even far too often start the process with no structure. So you never even know if you're completing the task, if you're swimming in the right direction. I was at a company that tried to introduce OKRs in an effort to simplify the strategic planning process. And for some reason, it became a very complex process that really ultimately, sorry for any of the teams listening, that ultimately ended up getting in the way of, I think, getting things done. Kind of the medium became the message a little bit there. But I do think this is such a simple and clear structure, not easy. It's simple, but not easy. And just for the listeners, again, I'll kind of, repeat those 4 steps that you mentioned: having a winning proposition, deciding where to play. The next is how to win. And then the 4th is how to configure. So essentially, like, how are you going to execute? Do you have the capabilities or put the capabilities in place to get that strategy done? This has been super, super helpful. Again, having the framework, understanding the deliverables and kind of those considerations to walk into the room with. I'd love to shift just in closing and to ask a couple of personal questions, not too personal. So what do you feel is the best piece of advice that you've ever gotten? Again, personal, business, can be anything, but what's a piece of advice that really kind of continues to inform your life?
I brought this up earlier, but I think through sheer luck in some ways, ended up with Toyota. And obviously this is an organization that has accomplished some pretty incredible things in its time. But the Toyota way is something they really indoctrinate you with. Like when you get off the plane in LA, you go to the training center and you build cars like other car companies do with little toys, and then you shift over to the other table and you do it the way Toyota does. And beyond just the manufacturing process or the dealer network or the things that have been successful tactically, commercially in the marketplace. The Toyota way is the foundation of that. And it's respect for people and a focus on continuous improvement. And that to me is broad enough and compelling enough, and helps you focus just on two things when you get up every day and you talk to your teams, or you think about what you're doing with your colleagues, or where your business is going to go. If you incrementally make it better and make sure that you understand that the company's just a collection of people, you see them as whole people, and you respect their individual contribution, you celebrate it, you know how important it is. That to me guides everything I do every day.
I love that. There's the personal aspect, and then the broader community aspect to that as well. So what keeps you up at night? So as you work in one of the fastest growing jobs in the channel, what's keeping you up at night?
What's literally keeping me up at night is the volatility and variability right now, right? I think we're seeing big public companies come to earnings calls and say, yeah, we don't know. Like,
sure,
not going to give you a revenue number because we just don't know. And I think we're in that same situation. And, in a strategy and planning lens, it means that you don't sleep much because you have to do work that you would have done once in many more, scenarios to consider. So you get into this, like, rather than say forecasting 3 outcomes, you have these multiple scenarios to consider. That's a challenge right now. It just really is. Like, there is much more uncertainty in the world. And it just, to me, the implication of it is, like, again, we have to get comfortable with it. We have to make our best informed guess and go with it. Because if we don't make the right investments, if you aren't bold in this time and confident in the long term, you may have a different ROI or payback horizon, but you've got to seize on that moment and don't let, volatility or the inability to expect what's going to happen shy away from things that will benefit your business and new adventures that you want to embark on for your field, for your customers, for your teams.
So last question. So how do you stay inspired? What gets you out of bed in the morning?
Again, something I touched on a little bit in that, what drew me into the channel. I think it's knowing that what we are doing every day is returning value to people in different walks of life, different parts of the world, different backgrounds with different aspirations, but we're bringing them together around a common purpose, a brand that is all about positivity and unity and happiness. And we are returning value to those people at scale. We as companies could make the choice to go on Amazon, to go into Walmart. We can eventually be as big as we are sometimes in this channel. But what really motivates me is knowing that we are staying true to democracy, meritocracy, delivering value to those people who are working the hardest, the smartest, and powering our businesses every day.
I love that. That is so perfect, I think, for the channel. And I know that works, for the field. I know that's true for you internally as well at the companies that you've worked at. It is kind of that motivator to make sure that we're supporting the person next to us when it's not just about ourselves. It makes a huge impact. Jacob, this has been incredible. I know that you have now single-handedly made the strategic planning process less painful for the entire direct selling channel. It was super helpful. Again, that framework's amazing. Understanding the deliverables and the path and what needs to be brought in ahead of time. I also know you're going to be at DSU here in October. So the listeners that loved this, which I know is going to be everybody, they can get even more insights and information from you there at DSU. Can you share just a little kind of sneak peek of what we can expect from there?
I think we'll be talking a little bit about field compensation and how to make sure that stays at the pace of the market, make sure that it really serves the needs of your field and makes sense in your business model. It's something that we as a channel really shy away from. It's really, really scary to think of the evolution of compensation because it's so ingrained in our businesses. But it's up to 47, 50 cents on every dollar. It's the biggest chunk of change on your P&L. And it's incredibly critical. It's a huge business lever. So we'd love to get into a little bit about how we keep pace with the times, compete in the gig market, and make sure that our financial rewards are what the audience is demanding.
That's really cool. Yeah, it is absolutely one of the most important sources of fuel for the entire direct selling channel. So Jacob, thanks again. Give everybody at MONAT our best. Thanks for all you do for the channel. Thanks for sharing these great insights, and we look forward to seeing you at DSU.
Thank you for having me. I'll be looking forward to it. It was really a pleasure to speak with you today.
Thank you for tuning in. To learn more insights and business building strategies from Jacob, Wayne, and more than 25 speakers, visit DSU2021.com today to reserve your spot for the all-virtual DSU event taking place October 18th through the 21st. It is 100% complimentary access for all active corporate direct selling executives. We hope to see you there.